Welcome to the debate. If you were born in Afghanistan, there is a 99% chance you are Muslim. If you were born in certain parts of the American South, you are overwhelmingly likely to be Christian. We like to think of our deepest beliefs as a result of a rigorous, independent quest for ultimate truth. But, statistically, the quiet hopes you lean on when the room goes dark, the way you make sense of a world that is breathtakingly beautiful one moment and unimaginably cruel the next, those frameworks are largely handed to you by a geographical lottery. And for those of us looking at this from the outside, it raises a staggering, heavy question. If there is an all-powerful, all-knowing creator, how do we reconcile that infinite knowledge with the sheer volume of suffering on this planet? And more importantly, how do we reconcile it with a system of faith that seems fundamentally rigged by where we happen to take our first breath? I approach our conversation today from a place of deep skepticism. When I look at the mechanics of faith, they appear to be driven by evolutionary biology and tribal geography rather than divine intervention. Furthermore, when I look at the concept of divine omniscience, a creator knowing every tragic, agonizing outcome before a fragile life even begins, I struggle to see how that logically coexists with love. Two very different ways of looking at the heaviest reality of the human experience. Let's explore them. I've laid out my skepticism. So how do you look at this incredibly mixed picture of reality and still see the footprint of a loving, all-knowing God?
Well, I start by looking at the exact same world you do. I mean, I don't deny the statistics of where we are born, and I definitely do not turn a blind eye to the pain.
Right. It's impossible to ignore.
Exactly. Any worldview, whether it's atheistic, agnostic, or theistic, has to face a brutally mixed picture. We live in a world of breathtaking beauty and, devastating bombs.
Yeah, biological disease, human cruelty.
Right. If a belief system cannot account for both the beauty and the barbed wire, it just isn't in touch with the world as it actually is. But I firmly reject the premise that divine omniscience equals a cruel determinism.
Okay, why is that?
Because the assumption you're making is that if God knows what will happen, God is somehow forcing a rigged game. And I'm sorry, but I just don't buy that. If you remove God from this equation, the suffering doesn't magically vanish.
No, the physical reality stays the same.
Right, the bombs still fall, the diseases still strike. But without God, that suffering becomes the final, definitive word. It is nothing more than meaningless tragedy in a cold, indifferent universe.
Just biological bad luck.
Exactly. But the theistic view, specifically the Christian narrative I come from, argues that a loving God does not remain insulated from this suffering. He enters directly into it. And crucially, he holds the power of resurrection, the power to ultimately compensate those who suffer. It doesn't neatly erase all our midnight questions, but it radically alters the landscape of our hope.
Let's walk right into the mechanics of that hope, though. Because before we can even talk about how a God might compensate physical suffering, we have to examine the boundaries of fairness.
Okay.
You mentioned that we both look at the same statistics. Globally, 91% of adults simply adopt and keep the religion they were raised in. Only a tiny fraction ever switch.
Right.
And from an anthropological standpoint, we know exactly why this happens. Human beings are tribal. Our brains are hardwired by evolution to adopt the beliefs of our in-group. Because historically, being exiled from your tribe meant death. So if salvation or ultimate goodness or access to this compensation you mentioned is predicated on holding the correct theology, the math is devastating. God is placing people in specific zip codes where their destiny is decided by their parents. How is that not a rigged game?
That is a profoundly understandable objection. In fact, it's one of the hardest problems around the edges of faith. But let's look at the actual nature of inherited belief.
All right.
This was the exact argument advanced by the philosopher Peter Singer. You likely know Singer, the Princeton ethicist.
Right. Very embedded in this secular movement.
Yeah. We actually participated in a debate in Australia some years ago. I opened my portion of the debate by being very upfront about my background, acknowledging that I was raised in a Christian environment.
Sure.
And when Peter got the chance to speak, he smiled and said, "Well, there goes my best objection to religion. People always just stay in the religion in which they are brought up."
He has a point there.
He does. But when it was my turn again, I had to point something out. I said, "Peter, I told the audience about my background, but you said nothing about yours. Were your parents atheists?"
Oh, interesting.
Right. And he admitted they were. I pointed out that he, too, had remained in the exact framework in which he was brought up. He protested, of course, saying atheism isn't a faith, but it absolutely is a belief system. It's a specific lens for interpreting the origin and meaning of the universe.
Wait, I see the rhetorical point you made there, but pointing out that Peter Singer inherited his atheism doesn't really solve the moral problem of the system itself.
How so?
Well, atheists aren't claiming that a supreme being will judge you based on your atheism. If I inherit the wrong theology because I was born in 12th century Tibet, and I never even hear about your specific theistic framework, doesn't all-loving God punish me for my geography?
No, he doesn't. And this is where the misunderstanding of divine judgment usually happens. The premise that God judges people for what they could not possibly know is fundamentally flawed.
So how does the judgment work then?
In the theistic framework, God measures people by how they respond to the evidence they actually have. Think about historical figures in the biblical narrative itself, people like Abraham or Moses.
Right, they lived millennia before Jesus.
Exactly. They didn't have explicit Christian knowledge. God does not judge anyone for not knowing what they didn't know. The metric is, what do we do with the light we are given? Do we pursue truth, kindness, and moral integrity with the tools we possess?
So it's sort of a sliding scale based on opportunity?
You could say that. An omniscient God is the only kind of judge who could be perfectly fair, because only an omniscient God knows the exact psychological and geographical limitations every individual operates under.
I hear that, but, saying God judges fairly on a sliding scale of available knowledge doesn't solve the physical reality of the suffering itself. It just explains what happens after. Let's take this concept of omniscience to its darkest logical conclusion. Let's talk about the physical creation of beings who are destined to endure horrific, unearned agony.
Okay.
I'm thinking of a visceral scenario, something the comedian Ricky Gervais often brings up. Imagine a baby born with a parasite that slowly eats its eyes from the inside out.
Yeah, that's horrific.
It happens in the real world. Now let's apply the mechanics of omniscience to this moment. If God is all-knowing, he didn't just foresee this. He knew this specific, horrific biological event would happen to this specific baby long before the child was even conceived.
Right.
As a human being with my basic, flawed moral compass, if I had the power to stop that parasite, I would intervene immediately. If God is omnipotent, he could intervene, but he doesn't. Where is the flaw in my outrage?
There is no flaw in your outrage. Let me be very clear about that. I feel the exact same profound weight when I hear a story like that. It is a staggering, heartbreaking reality.
It really is.
In fact, when we analyze problems like this, we do it with our God-given moral sense. The very capacity to love a stranger's child, the very capacity to feel outrage at injustice. Theists argue that this moral compass is an imprint of the divine. We naturally look at the parasite and say, if I were God, I would have stopped this.
Because stopping it is the only morally coherent action.
But let's look at the alternative mechanism. Let's say we remove God from that scenario completely. What happens?
The baby still suffers.
Right. The parasite still exists. Nature is red in tooth and claw. But now, without God, what is the conclusion? That child is simply dead, gone, snuffed out into the void. There is no hope, no justice, no healing, no ultimate meaning to that suffering.
It's just a tragic biological reality.
Exactly. Is there anywhere evidence enough to trust God with a situation that dark? To my mind, the major piece of evidence is the concept of a suffering God. In the Christian narrative, God hasn't remained distant from human agony. He stepped into the world and subjected himself to its worst brutality.
Meaning the cross.
Yes, and crucially, C.S. Lewis has helped me immensely here. We are so deeply conditioned to thinking that this present, physical world is the only one there is. But if there is a loving God and there is another world, I suspect that when we one day enter that reality and see what God has done to restore and infinitely compensate that child, we will have no more questions. The scale of the compensation will outweigh the temporary pain.
I understand why that narrative is incredibly comforting. The promise of infinite compensation in another world is a beautiful story, but we have to look closely at the mechanism of that comfort.
All right.
Let's talk about how the human brain processes psychological trauma. When human beings are faced with random, senseless tragedy, like that child, our brains flood with stress hormones. Cortisol spikes. We are desperate for a narrative that makes the pain mean something.
Sure, an unpredictable world is terrifying to our nervous system.
Exactly. So we tell ourselves there's a grand plan or a future compensation, And the moment we do that, the brain releases dopamine and serotonin. We feel a profound sense of peace. It's an incredible evolutionary coping mechanism. But the hard question we have to ask ourselves is, does the psychological utility of that belief actually prove it is objectively true? We desperately need that child to be compensated, but wanting a narrative to be true to soothe our own existential dread doesn't manifest it into reality.
You're touching on something deeply personal for me now. 14 years ago, I was facing a major surgery.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, the doctors were not optimistic. They thought I wasn't going to make it through the operation. I had to sit down and say goodbye to my wife. We truly thought that was the end of our time together on this earth.
That must have been terrifying.
It was heavy, but in that moment, as I was wheeled away into the operating theater, both of us experienced a total, inexplicable peace. It wasn't just a reduction in stress. It was a profound, tangible presence.
But you survived the surgery.
I didn't die, no. The surgeon saved my life. But that peace was undeniably real. Years later, I traveled to New Zealand just days after a devastating earthquake had leveled parts of the country. I was sitting in the rubble speaking to people who had just lost their children, their spouses, everything they owned.
God, that's heartbreaking.
It was. I talked to them about a God who suffers, a God who understands the depth of human grief. And it was that specific concept that gave the most profound hope to the people listening. They wrote me letters from months afterward. That peace, that hope in the face of absolute despair is a powerful indicator to me that there is something objectively real at the core of this.
If you're listening to this and you've ever prayed for a sick relative or faced your own mortality, you probably know exactly the kind of peace my colleague is talking about. I do not doubt the sincerity of your peace for a second, nor do I doubt the immense comfort those people felt in the rubble. But again, we have to look at the neurology and psychology of belief. We have vast amounts of data on this. The data clearly shows that devout Muslims leaning into their faith, devout Hindus praying to their deities, and devout Christians focusing on the cross all experience the exact same physiological meaning boost. Their brains exhibit the exact same sense of profound peace.
Right, I've seen those studies.
Furthermore, sociologists have found that statistically, the more economically or physically hopeless a person's environment becomes, the higher the probability they will turn to a religion.
Yes, that correlation exists.
This strongly suggests that this peace is a highly effective psychological utility. Think about how your body physically reacts to watching a truly great fictional movie. Your heart races. You feel a deep connection to the universe. You might even cry, but it's fiction. If I believe there is an invisible dragon at the bottom of my garden who protects my house, and I feel immense peace because of that belief, my feeling of peace does not mean the dragon is actually there.
That's a very compelling argument. You are absolutely right that human psychology explains why we seek comfort outside ourselves. But have you considered that a positive psychological feeling doesn't automatically invalidate the belief either?
How do you mean?
Well, if it is true that a loving God exists and that we were created to be in a relationship with Him, you would fully expect that connecting with Him would yield a massive psychological benefit. The peace isn't proof that it's false, it's exactly what you would expect if it were true.
Fair point, but it's not objective proof that it is true either.
I completely concede that. Subjective comfort isn't enough. If we are looking for truth, we have to look much deeper than just the chemical reactions in our brains. C.S. Lewis wrote a brilliant book in the 1940s where he examined dozens of different ancient religions from all over the globe.
And what did he find?
In every single one of them, despite vast geographical isolation, he found the same moral baseline, the golden rule. Do unto others as you would have them do to you. A shared morality is hardwired into the human system, across all boundaries.
Sure, basic human cooperation.
But while that moral behavior might be shared, the historical claims of these religions are not, and this is where we move from psychology to history. My Jewish friends believe Jesus died but did not rise. My Muslim friends believe he didn't die on the cross at all. I believe he died and rose from the dead.
Logically, they can't all be true.
Exactly. So we have to proceed on the basis of evidence. We have to investigate the historical reality. If a human being actually rose from the dead, rupturing the permanent finality of death, it is the most monumental thing that has ever happened in the history of the universe.
It would change everything.
It opens a door to knowing, objectively, that life outlasts death, and establishing that requires a rigorous personal investigation of historical evidence, not just resting on a feeling of psychological peace.
It is a monumental claim, without question, but extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence. And for many of us, historical accounts written decades after the fact just don't bridge the gap between a comforting story and objective reality.
I understand that tension.
And it always circles back to that core tension, doesn't it? We start our lives in the vast, seemingly arbitrary statistics of our birth, the geography and the tribes that hand us our very first lenses on the world. We look out at the darkest corners of human suffering, the unimaginable pain of an innocent child, and we struggle deeply to fit that raw reality into the frame of an all-knowing, loving creator.
It's the heaviest question we carry.
Yeah. And then we inevitably arrive at the quiet, intimate moments of our own lives. The sudden, inexplicable peace we feel when we face the operating room, or when we stand in the rubble of what used to be our lives, desperately needing the story to end in restoration.
Absolutely.
The day we've walked the fragile line between seeking hard, uncompromising truth and honoring the profound, hardwired human need for psychological comfort. We haven't solved the mystery of the birth lottery today. We haven't erased the deep philosophical tension between a creator's omniscience and human agony. Yet the questions themselves remind us of our shared humanity. Whether you see the world through the meticulous lens of a skeptic demanding evidence for the invisible, or through the lens of a theist trusting in an ultimate loving compensation for our deepest wounds, we are all navigating the exact same beautiful, barbed wire world. I want to turn this over to you, listening right now. When you face the darkest moments of your own life, do you believe the peace you search for is a sign of a higher objective truth, or is it simply a beautiful story we tell ourselves to keep going in the dark? We'd love to read your thoughts below. If exploring these deep questions brought some light to your day or just made you feel a little less alone in your own doubts, we'd be honored if you subscribed and joined us for future conversations. Thank you for spending this time with us. May you find clarity in your questions and peace in your journey. Take care.